All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Monday, or not really happy Monday. It's Monday on the Mark Thompson Show. I'm Mo Kelly, back in for Mark Thompson, and I got to tell you, I have to be honest with you. I was wrong. I was wrong about the shutdown. I was of the opinion that it was going to go all the way through possibly Thanksgiving into the holidays. I was wrong when I said that the Democrats and Republicans were equally committed to the shutdown and wanted it. I was wrong. I was wrong because I overestimated the will and the resiliency and the commitment of the Democrats. And we're going to get into that and the shutdown in just a second. We have to also talk about the law and disorder, which is really going on. And I would say in the wake of the Trump presidential pardons, we'll talk about that. And we have Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, who's going to be joining Mark Thompson, a previously recorded conversation, which we'll have in the second hour. But I have to say good morning / good afternoon to my help and my host, I should say, as they lead me along. I'm just here for the ride. Kim McAllister and also Tony Sorrentino I work with in my days at iHeart. Good morning and good afternoon to both of you.
Good morning. How was the weekend?
It was way too short.
Yeah.
I was doing all sorts of various and sundry things. Kim, you were saying in the pre-show that you were looking at some of the stuff that I was doing in martial arts. Well, on Saturdays, I teach most of the classes for kids and adults in the morning. And then I went to see one of my students perform in a Willy Wonka play at his middle school. Okay. And then went out to an all evening affair with my wife Saturday night and watched football Sunday. So it was a full weekend, but it was way too short. And I wish you could have been there to see my facial expression when the news report came down that the shutdown might be ending. It was on the verge of ending. Why? Because not one, not two, not three, not four, but 8 different Democrats decided, you know what? We're not really committed to this fight. We should try a different tactic. And if you haven't heard by now, 8 Senate Democrats have decided to break ranks and vote for this, I guess, continuing resolution. And I don't know why they did it. I'll let them speak for themselves because I'm not going to justify what they're doing. But I'm talking about Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, Jackie Rosen of Nevada, Catherine Cortez Master of Nevada, John Fetterman, Pennsylvania, of course, and Tim Kaine of Virginia, former vice presidential candidate, and Angus King of Maine, who's an independent, but caucuses with the Democrats. That's name by name, line by line of those who broke ranks with the Democratic Party to go along with the Republican bill and start the process to end this shutdown. And I have some semi-rhetorical questions here. What was the point of the pain of the shutdown if you were not going to see? Because at this point, the Democrats are walking away and they have nothing to show for the pain that was inflicted upon everyday Americans, federal employees, people who were struggling with their SNAP benefits. What was the point of the pain if you agreed with the original agreement handed down by the House Republicans? I don't understand that. I don't have an answer for that. And I was so disenchanted to get that news, because if you're going to have people suffer, and I believe it was a righteous fight, there are some fights you have to fight, even if it ends up that you lose, because the fight in and of itself is righteous. For me, this was a righteous fight. For Chuck Schumer, this was a second chance at getting his manhood back, that I would say, because he caved the first time around. So I thought, there's no way he's going to cave a second time. And I don't know if I can blame him personally for caving, but I can blame him for not keeping the Democratic caucus together. And that's why you have strong leadership to keep the caucus together. Now, here's a video I want to play. And mind you, when I said Angus King of Maine, he's an independent. So in other words, he is not perfectly aligned with Democratic ideals as far as the party platform is concerned, but he does caucus with the Democrats, meaning he votes Democratic most of the time. Here's what Angus King had to say on MSNBC, and I hope that you gleaned from it the same thing that I did. Go ahead, Tony.
Oops, rendering.
Yeah, I know
Well,
it happens.
As we wait for it, I just want to mention that I was surprised that they did all this without any promised movement on healthcare, really.
They
They
got
didn't even get anything except for we'll vote on it maybe when the time comes. So all of that, it really feels like for nothing.
It was for nothing. It's not feels like for nothing. They cannot legitimately say that they tangibly received anything in return. It would be different if they said, okay, we're going to get a vote on health care and we're going to get some of these subsidies instated in the short term. All they got was, we'll just have a vote at a later date in December. And do you honestly believe that the Republicans who have been acting in bad faith up until this point will have a vote in good faith in a month? Because you've already showed your belly, you turned over, you showed your belly. So why is it the Republicans then would then have an earnest discussion about adding back the Obamacare subsidies if you've already shown right now that you're willing to walk away and get nothing, absolutely nothing? It's almost like the shutdown did not happen. And I really want to emphasize the fact that the Democrats received nothing except the pain of the shutdown. And here's the truth, and I've said this before, and I remain of this opinion, that who gets blamed for the shutdown doesn't mean anything, because there'll be some other world-threatening issue or controversy the next day, and the next day, and the next day between now and the midterm. So who gets blamed for the shutdown is secondary. But who wins the shutdown, in other words, who gets something out of it, is completely different. And the Democrats abrogated their responsibility to get something out of the shutdown. Hey, Tony, do you have the other video talking about the totality of the shutdown?
Good morning, Robin. Well, President Trump was at the football game last night as this was all coming together, telling reporters only, quote, "It looks like we're getting very close to the shutdown ending." Now, the president has stayed out of all of this. Instead of negotiating and talking with Democrats, he has urged Republicans to stand their ground, making it clear to Democrats that they weren't going to get what they wanted. Trump conceded, though, just days ago that the shutdown was one of the reasons that Republicans lost in last week's elections, admitting the shutdown has been, quote, "worse for us than for them." But even as voters blamed Republicans, it's clear Trump's efforts to up the pressure on Democrats is working, whether through those firings or the fight over food assistance. The president is making the impacts of this shutdown simply too painful to ignore. Robin.
And Mary, over the weekend, the president issued another round of pardons, we know.
He did, Robin, the president issuing sweeping pardons to key figures accused of trying to help him overturn the 2020 election results, including his former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, attorney Sidney Powell, and John Eastman, advisor Boris Epshteyn, and his own former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, as well as 72 other individuals. Now, these sweeping pardons cover each of the president's co-defendants who were charged in Georgia for a sweeping scheme to overturn the election results, 4 of whom pleaded guilty. But these pardons are largely symbolic. Presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes, and none of these Trump allies were charged in a federal case. But it is just another example of the president trying to rewrite the history of the 2020 election, Robin.
Okay, that's good enough. And we can see right there, yes, the pardons were mostly ceremonial. They were symbolic, I think the word was used, and it doesn't do anything substantively. But I think it does change the messaging of the moment, where last week, less than a week ago, Democrats and those on the left side of the aisle were celebrating the results of those special elections, the result of Prop 50 here in California, in the mayoral race in New York City. We had the governor's race in Virginia. You had the governor's race in New Jersey. Democrats were feeling very good about themselves, and with good reason, justifiably so. And then less than a week later, that's why I said all this talk about who wins the shutdown is neither here nor there, because you can see just in the space of 6 days, the whole topic of conversation has changed because the shutdown is ending. And for some reason, the Democrats have broken ranks. I am so disappointed in the fact that we had the shutdown, and the Democrats who supposedly were committed to the shutdown obviously did not have the resolve to see it through, all the way through. And coming out of it, they're not getting anything. They're getting absolutely nothing. The shutdown was under the guise of fighting for healthcare subsidies to keep Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, from collapsing, to keep you and me and everyone watching this feed right now from paying thousands of dollars more each month in healthcare. That was a righteous fight to have. And yet here we are. Chuck Schumer could not keep his caucus together. And then you have these 8 defections. And now we're right back where we started as a nation, all of us, right back where we started. And then you're not any closer to preserving healthcare. Oh, I'm sorry. You did get a promise, whatever that's worth, from Republicans to revisit this in a month. You think they're actually going to do something to save healthcare and the Affordable Care Act in a month? I'm hot, Kim. It's not the way I wanted to start my week.
You and Delamater, he says, Mo, I was wrong also. I didn't think there'd be a cave-in now that we had him by the demos wussed out again. He says, so there you go.
It hurts me because I know people were hurting. People are still hurting. And on top of that, people are going to hurt even more because I cannot say confidently, I cannot say seriously, I cannot say in any way that the Republicans are going to come to the table and then try to hash out some sort of agreement before the winter recess, mind you, and everyone goes back home for the holidays, and they're going to do something to save the Affordable Care Act. Why? You had more leverage last week than you do now. You had leverage. You had Republicans on the run. They were concerned about the prospect of the midterms and what this shutdown could mean. The president himself was saying, because of the shutdown, the Democrats won those elections. Whether that's true or not, that was what was coming out of the mouth of the president. You had actual leverage. The shutdown was working. And although, and I'm not pushing aside the pain of Americans, but the pain has to be for a purpose. Otherwise, you're just enduring abuse. You are abusing Americans if you're not actually having them benefit in some way from the pain. If you could go back to your constituents and say, yes, I understand it's been painful for the past 50 or so days. We've had this shutdown. I understand that your families have been struggling, but we were fighting for you to ensure your health care. And on the other side of it, we have preserved your health care. And by that, saving you thousands of dollars per month. They can't say that. All they can say now is, well, we've helped reopen the government. And here's the flip side to that. This is the bad news. If the Democrats go around saying, well, we helped reopen the government, or we did this to reopen the government, then you are, in a way, arguing against yourself and then admitting, air quotes, that the Democrats shut down the government. And I know that I know that's not actually what happened, but you're playing into the Republicans' own messaging. I just don't understand this. And I understand that Chuck Schumer is more concerned with saving his political career. He wants to remain minority leader of the Senate. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that because even though he may not have been the one who caved, he was the one who allowed this to happen. Oh, talk about martial arts, Kim. Here's something that we teach our students all the time. You don't want to be in a fight because usually bad things happen in a fight.
Sure.
You could win, you could still get hurt. You could lose and get hurt. You could win, not get hurt, and still get sued. You could lose, get hurt, get sued, all that. You could win, person can go to the car and come back with a gun. In other words, avoid a fight at all costs. But if you should fight, if you find yourself in a situation where you must defend yourself, defend a family member, commit. Do all you can to win the fight. Worry about the other stuff on the other side. But in the midst of a fight, you have to do what you can to win the fight. You can't agree to the fight and say, you know what? On second thought, I think I'm going to step out of this. No. You've already endured the weight and burden.
Big mistake.
Of the ass kicking. Go ahead.
Big mistake on this fight. I didn't mean to get in here at all.
No, go ahead.
No. It's crazy. It's just crazy. We got a message from Vilma. She's upset. She says, why do 8 Democratic senators speak for the whole party? You give up too soon.
They didn't speak for the whole party, but I think they were speaking out of their own selfish interests. We know the history of John Fetterman. He's just completely on his own agenda. I don't think he cares about the party at all. And without knowing, I think Angus King is retiring. And I believe a good number of these senators, have to look it up, are up for re-election, and they're concerned about their own personal electoral prospects. And unfortunately, when you're the minority party, or we're only talking about a small sliver of a party, you have outsized importance and power. I think of this time, maybe 2 years ago, with Joe Manchin and how he was trying to play both sides of the aisle and play both parties against the other, and he wants to be kingmaker. We're seeing this to a certain extent in these senators here, where they had power to get something out of this, or at least preserve. And I don't know what he was hearing. They were hearing from their constituents. I get that. They're still responsible to the constituents, but part of the reason why you may be an independent like Angus King, you should not be beholden to certain things. You know, if you're going to caucus with the Democrats, you're basically saying, I'm throwing my hat in with the Democrats and also the Democratic platform. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to be caucusing with the Democrats, then you should be mindful of the Democratic platform. And Angus King hurt the Democrats. And it's going to be I don't know what you can do about some of these members. It's not like you can, I don't know what type of leverage you can have. Maybe you can strip some of their seats from some of the committees, but they hurt the Democratic Party today. Mm-hmm. They absolutely did. And I don't want to sugarcoat this, because some of you have been telling me, Mo, don't sugarcoat it. Well, this is one of those times. I am not going to sugarcoat it. The Dems did not get their ass kicked. They kicked their own asses. Can I say that?
Yes, exactly. I have a couple questions for you. The first is that, do you think, and I hate to not have people get health care, because I think that's dangerous. I think it puts people at risk, their health at risk, and people could suffer serious consequences because they won't be able to afford health care. Means you won't go to the doctor, you won't get treatment, people could die, right?
Right.
I don't like to see that, but if people are faced with mounting healthcare costs as a midterm election comes, do you think they'll more blame the Republicans for that or the Democrats for that? And if people can't afford their health care, and we still have only concepts of a plan from the president who's thinking, hey, I'd like to give you some money to buy your own health care, not going to work. So we don't have that plan at all. So that means that as we move toward these midterm elections, could it play into the Democrats' hands to have healthcare costs rising? And will that reflect poorly on Trump, or will people remember back that the Democrats couldn't quite get it together to fight for this?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is very, very complicated, if only because I happen to believe that most Americans don't understand how healthcare works. They don't understand, like, for example, if you were to just go to the doctor and you don't have healthcare coverage, just getting having your blood drawn is thousands of dollars. Just have rudimentary tests to be taken to urgent care, to be carried in an ambulance. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. And I don't believe most Americans get that. And since they don't get that, they erroneously believe that the healthcare system or the healthcare plan they have right now is sufficient and sustainable. Neither is true. And they don't understand that the only reason why it's halfway sufficient is Obamacare. And the only way that Obamacare halfway works is because of the subsidies. They have not made the connection that this would be Armageddon for our healthcare industry. I should say for healthcare for people like you and me in America. No hyperbole, because most people can't pay an extra $1,000 or $2,000 per month just to keep their health care plan. And then we're talking about what you're talking about, Kim, where people are making then the decision to forego health care, which is even worse, which goes back to what I was saying. Now try to see a doctor without health care.
Well, there's
and
two
see what
prices.
that bill.
There's the private pay price, and then there's the healthcare price, right?
Yeah.
So the minute you have healthcare, even if you're paying out of your own pocket, like say, because I have a plan where you have to hit a certain threshold, so I have to pay a certain amount before insurance kicks in and pays 100% of everything, right? But there's a different price for me because I have insurance, so it's much less with insurance, even if I'm paying out of pocket. But if people have no healthcare, the price shoots up, even private pay price.
And they may not realize that individually or collectively until there's some sort of health or medical emergency. And I'm not even talking about dental care. I'm just talking about medical health care as we may think of it. I'm not talking about like a vision plan. I talk about these things because this is all very personal to me, because I am on the ACA, California Exchange. You know, I pay for my vision and I pay for my dental out of pocket. This is all very real to me.
Right.
So if I go to my wife and say, okay, we're going to have to pay another $2,000 a month because we're talking about a family plan. We're not talking about an individual. We're talking about two adults with careers. And then you have 3 kids. In my case, you know, one is still on our health care. The other 2 have aged out. But what about them? And them individually, as far as them trying to procure health care, it is one of the moments in American history where we're going to possibly play with economic ruination because we can't find a way to do what's best for the American people. This really should not have anything to do with politics, because as long as you exist on this earth, you have to have some sort of healthcare component to your life. You have to. Now, if you happen to be 21 years old in the prime of your life, you may not think of it. When I was 21, I wasn't thinking about healthcare because I thought I was going to live forever and I was in great health and I was working out every day and, you know, and age was on my side. Then all of a sudden 35 rolled around. Now 55 is rolled around. If we don't get health care right in the near term, as in right now, either improving, fixing, or replacing Obamacare, whatever that looks like, universal health care, if we don't do it now before 2028, I believe that our economy is going to go through the floor because Americans cannot afford health care as it stands. And Mike in Willow makes a great point. I mean, we spend our money relative to our priorities. And our priorities in America is defense spending and ICE spending. And spending money on Argentina or spending money for wars in the Middle East. We have plenty of money to spend for an administration's priorities. But for a supposed administration, which is about America first, and healthcare is not in that equation, education is not in that equation, it boggles my mind. Healthcare and education should not be political footballs. But that takes me back to the Democrats. It's like, this is one of those fights you had to fight, even if it was painful, because the pain right now is going to be secondary to what the pain is going to be without any type of subsidy support for the Affordable Care Act. I mean, I'm voting for universal health care because I've traveled enough around the world to know that universal health care is the only way to go. But for some reason, this rich nation can't find its way to single-payer universal health care. And there's going to be a cost for it. And I tend to be an a-hole in arguing this on social media because I will go around to different GoFundMes and Kickstarters and remind the people, it's like, oh, you're the same individuals who wanted to complain about Obamacare, who don't want single-payer health care, and now you're begging for money because grandma has cancer. I'm sympathetic, but not all that sympathetic, because these things are not separate. They are connected in the larger issue of trying to find some way to have affordable health care so your loved ones don't have to either go into debt or bankruptcy to hopefully save a loved one. Hopefully.
Got a message from Luis on 5. He says Trumponomics, Trumpconomics for the common citizen. Receive a one-time $2K tariff refund, but pay $2K more for healthcare monthly. Makes sense. No.
As they say, the kids say, that math ain't mathing. And,
No.
and some people, and I don't want to be too disrespectful, but dumb people don't understand the math of receiving a one-time check, which may never come, just like the $5,000 Doge check. But, some people are actually moved by the idea of a $2,000 check, not knowing that that's not going to cover even a blood draw if it came down to it. And I'm not exaggerating.
No. It's crazy.
I'm angry at the Democrats today. I'm angry because they were not just fighting for Democrats. They were fighting for all Americans, because every American has to have some form of health care, not only for themselves, but for the whole system. Because when you have more and more uninsured people entering the system, the healthcare system is more likely to collapse on itself. And if they're not getting that money from the insured and they're not getting that money from the uninsured, it's only going to have a bad ending. When you have a for-profit healthcare system, this is the inevitability. And I'm a capitalist through and through, but I'm a capitalist eyes wide open. And I know when you have a profit motive healthcare, invariably, it's always going to become more expensive forever. For as much as we say, we can't have a socialist nation, we can't have a communist nation, those are the same damn people who are complaining about how high the rent is. Same people complaining about how high groceries are, or eggs are, or gas is. They don't understand there is a correlation. I'm all for capitalism, but let's be clear here that a lot of capitalism is unsustainable in its current form. First and foremost, Exhibit A, healthcare.
Joseph says states should create their own universal health care. Stop thinking Washington's going to do it for you.
Well, Mitt Romney tried to do that in the late 1990s / early 2000s, and they had an approximation of that in Massachusetts. Barack Obama tried to take that exact same plan and bring it to a federalized platform, and they said it was socialism, you can't do it. And so they dropped the universal single payer component, which was originally a part of the Affordable Care Act, because they couldn't get that through Congress. So yes, it has been tried on varying levels, on a state level, to varying degrees of success. And that model was supposed to be the foundation and blueprint for the Affordable Care Act / Obamacare. And that's something else. The fact that it's been branded Obamacare, it will never be successful because it's seen as connected to Barack Obama, not for the benefit of the whole nation. And I think the Democrats have done a good job as far as retaking that or embracing the Obamacare name, which was meant as a slight and insult, and remaking it into something positive. But still, there are far too many Americans who don't understand what the Affordable Care Act was and how that's no different from Obamacare. And put it this way, there's a majority of ignorance out there surrounding healthcare, which makes these moments almost impossible to navigate. Because if you don't understand healthcare, then you are at the whims of politicians who are telling you, it's like, we can't have Obamacare, or we need to replace Obamacare. With what? With what? They won't tell you the truth. They don't have a better idea. The only better idea is universal health care, single payer. That's the only better idea. And the Republicans can't say that. They would rather you just believe that there's some sort of magical concepts of a plan, which is going to turn into a plan that is better than what we have right now. And I'm here to tell you, what we have right now is not great. Not great. It is a Band-Aid, and it's like a Band-Aid we put on a sore 3 weeks ago. That Band-Aid is not doing any job. It's doing its job anymore. So we have to do something, but the Republicans are suggesting that we go back to the old system, which is not an option. And they say, and there's an old saying, they say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the Republicans are arguing we need the perfect plan, but not single payer, not universal health care. But we want to have the perfect plan because it's better than what we have right now. But they can't tell you what that plan is, because if they tell you, they have to invariably come to the realization as single payer or universal health care. I'm hot. I'm hot today. I'm hurt. I'm hot. I'm mad, and I'm hurt at the Democrats because they gave up this fight and they have nothing to show for it. They cannot genuinely go to constituents and say, we fought for you and we won this for you.
No. They can do nothing. What was the whole point of it all? And what did they get? They got a promise that the people that were laid off during the shutdown will be rehired. They got a promise that maybe if Trump even signs this thing, right? And they got the promise that that the furloughed federal workers will get their back pay that they missed during the shutdown. And they got a promise from Republicans that we will consider and vote on an extension to medical benefits in the coming weeks. That's all they got. All of this for that.
I think you're being kinder than me. I think they got less than nothing. Mm-hmm. And what I mean is they got nothing for the fight, and they got less than nothing because they have to then deal with the reality of people going through pain for no reason, which makes it even worse.
Yeah.
And I am very, very disheartened and actually in disbelief. I don't know. And Hugh asks, I wonder how much those 8 got from their donors to cave. I don't know. I don't know if it was a financial consideration, a donor consideration. I don't know. There's no telling what type of conversations the 8 who defected behind the scenes, what they thought that they were doing to help their personal political careers or the party more broadly. I don't know. You listen to Angus King. We played a little bit of that. That was a ridiculous excuse. Paraphrasing him, said we tried standing up to him as in the president, and that didn't work. So I guess they decided, well, all we can do now is cave. It's like, I tried to fight the bully, but he hit me in the mouth and it hurt real bad. So I went home.
They need some Mo Kelly training is what they need.
Look,
and how to fight.
You know, there's a way to fight, and you have to think about the fight before you get into fight. You have to think about all the contingencies. In other words, if this shutdown is to last more than a month, what does that mean for us? You know, are we willing to fight more than a month? And if you're not willing to fight more than a month, then you shouldn't have started the fight in the first place, because you're not really committed to it. And any fight that you're not committed to, you are going to lose, and you're going to lose badly. And if I can say anything in support of the Republicans, I like, if I compartmentalize, I like the fact that they don't care. And what I mean by that is their goal is most important. And it doesn't matter if you don't like them, if you don't like their executive actions, you don't like their rhetoric, you don't like their racism, you don't like their sexism, you don't like their Islamophobia or homophobia. They don't care. And that's why they're willing to hold out, because they know that the Democrats do care. And they will give in. And they're proven right again. That's not in support of the Republicans. I'm saying that there's a lesson to be learned from the Republicans.
If people can't afford to pay for their Affordable Care Act or Obamacare healthcare, then Obamacare really dies. Because if no one can afford it, then no one's going to use it. And it becomes, I think, dead in the water, right? And
you are correct.
And perhaps that may have been the goal for Republicans all along, who fought tooth and nail against it, right? I mean, Trump has been saying he wants to kill Obamacare this whole time. He doesn't come in offering anything in its place. But maybe this is the point. Maybe they just want to, stick a knife in the heart of Obamacare and let it go.
They've tried a couple of strategies, the whole repeal and replace. And then people were saying like, well, what are you going to replace it with? And then they found that wasn't going to work. And so they've stopped that whole messaging of repeal and replace. I remember Senator Ted Cruz said very early on, I think it was in a conversation with Rush Limbaugh, where he said that we have to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, because people get addicted to the subsidies. They have always targeted the subsidies from the very beginning, knowing that if you strip the funding of the Affordable Care Act, you basically gut it. And they've done this with a lot of legislation. They've done it with the Voting Rights Act, where you strip certain foundational principles and support for it, then you've effectively gutted it. They're using that same type of tactic and approach with the Affordable Care Act. Well, if you get rid of the subsidies, well, the Obamacare doesn't really exist in any form or measurable way going forward. But I want to put a pin in that right there, because alongside of what we're seeing, the shutdown, there's a lot of law and there's a lot of disorder going on at the same time as all that silliness in Washington. So Kim, take it away.
This is law and disorder. I think we have it. Oh no, we lost Tony. Oh man, that's all right. Okay. I got you. Hold on, here it is.
In the criminal justice system, the people,
pimps, addicts, thieves, bums, winos, girls who can't keep an address, and men who don't care,
are represented by two separate yet equally important groups.
A cop, a flatfoot, a bull, a dick, John Law. You're the fuzz, the heat, you're poison, you're trouble, you're bad news.
These are their stories.
And here we are. You want me to read the stories?
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, I'll do it. Ghislaine Maxwell's prison emails show she's happier, Mo, at a minimum security Texas facility. Of course she is, right? Maxwell is indeed a convicted sex offender connected to Jeffrey Epstein, as you know, and was moved to a less restrictive federal prison over the summer. Congress now investigating potential allegations of special treatment on the part of Ghislaine Maxwell. She was moved to the all-women's federal prison camp, which houses inmates convicted of nonviolent offenses and white-collar crimes. They've got dormitory-style quarters. A lot of people saying this is very unusual for prisoners with sex offenses on their record to be incarcerated in such an unconstrained setting. And they think that means that Maxwell is getting some preferential treatment here. She had been in a low security federal correctional institution in Florida after her conviction on federal sex trafficking charges. And so now NBC News is reviewing some of the emails she sent during her first few months in the less restrictive setting. And the emails were obtained by the House Judiciary Committee, and the emails describe Maxwell's relief at being in a calmer facility without violence, where staff is polite and the food is better. She said, my situation is improved by being at Bryan. That's the name of the camp. The kitchen looks clean too. No possums falling from the ceiling to fry, unfortunately, on ovens and become mingled with the food being served. She said, I feel like I have dropped through Alice in Wonderland's looking glass. I am much, much happier here, and more importantly, safe.
You know what that is, right? That's an open letter thank you note to the Trump administration. There is no reason in the world, not legal, not moral, not ethical, for this woman convicted of these crimes to get any improvement in her housing or facilities or her prison stay. And it's being done out in the open, which goes back to what I was saying about the Republicans. They don't care. Why? Because there are no consequences to anything. There are no political consequences. Maybe there may be some electoral consequences, but we won't know that until next November. But there are basically no consequences. There is really nothing for them to lose in the short term or long term, as far as we can see, by giving Ghislaine Maxwell anything she wants, including a pardon. And with the pardons we talked about a little bit earlier in the show, of how these 6 symbolic pardons for all the people who were helping with the fake electors. They're symbolic, but and again, it's another open letter thank you message for those individuals who held the line, who did Trump's bidding. No consequences at all.
Speaking of pardons, former January 6th defendant arrested on kidnapping and aggravated assault charges. Maybe that whole idea of the blanket pardon for everyone involved in January 6th, not such a smooth move. This man from Utah, previously charged with firing a gun outside of the Capitol during the January 6th attack in 2021. He was apparently a Trump supporter, right? And he was arrested during the attack on the U.S. Capitol, pardoned, and then arrested again last month, this time on kidnapping and sexual assault charges. What a nice guy. 40-year-old John Banuelos from Utah. He says he's got a sister who lives in the Chicago area, so he was arrested in the Chicago area. The warrant issued in Salt Lake County on charges of aggravated kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault. He was previously identified in an NBC News story revealing him as the man who shot off a weapon at the Capitol on January 6th. Yeah, so, I mean,
I have some rhetorical questions, Kim, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's come up with them. I've seen them asked other places, but I need some help better understanding. The auto pen with Joe Biden is an issue, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm supposed to believe that Donald Trump signed 1,500 pardons just for January 6th. That's the first rhetorical question.
Mm-hmm.
I was under the impression that January 6th was a hoax, or it was something perpetrated by the Democrats, Antifa, undercover feds. Why then would Donald Trump, in his inimitable wisdom, not use his auto pen and pardon some 1,500 Antifa adherents? And at the end of it all, why would we keep allowing the Trump administration to tell these lies because they're aware of them, tell these lies with not enough pushback? There's been some pushback, but every time you see a pardon of Rudy Giuliani, a pardon of the fake electors scheme, that is an opportunity for the Democrats to say again and again and again that this administration is not only corrupt, but criminal. Because if you are participating in the exoneration of the criminals, you are also criminal. If you had a role in the fake electors and you're also pardoning them, in any other world, you would be an accessory to that crime. And here we are, and I understand that there are no consequences, but it's incumbent upon the Democrats to keep pointing this out every step of the way. And when I say to the credit of Republicans, I believe this is intentional. You do these pardons when they would be a lesser story as opposed to the end of the shutdown. So it just kind of just, there's like an extra ingredient in the cake that is also thrown in there, but you're not necessarily paying as much attention to. These are the times where the Democrats need to be strong on something. You're not going to fight for health care. Fight for something, someone. You ask why I'm an independent. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kim.
It's like they just threw all this. They said they got tired of going through all the names, and they just said, you know what? Just pardon everybody. I think that's what happened. Just go ahead and pardon everybody in the January 6th debacle. Instead of taking the time and going through and thinking, does this person have a prior history? Does this person have a, what's going on? Looking at case by case bases, right? They just did a blanket, throw them to the wolves. And now we see that a lot of the people, many of the people who were not the people involved in a protest outside the Capitol, but people who were in the Capitol, who were breaking laws, have a history of breaking laws. They were the criminals anyway.
Scott Healy asked, Mo, why and how minimal pushback? Honest question. Well, if I understand your question correctly, why are the Democrats pushing back in a minimal way, or is it how is it I see that it's minimal pushback? Because this is not something that Democrats are talking about consistently every step of the way. There have been consistent pardons of all people who have been connected to January 6th or overturning the 2020 election. This is something I believe is a missed opportunity for the Democrats in a messaging sense to consistently portray this administration is not only corrupt, but criminal. You get the opportunity to remind people of the criminality which was going on in the wake of the 2020 election. You could talk about the corruption as far as the crypto scams, the enrichment of the Trump family. That's one thing. But I think the Democrats should have been stronger on reminding people of the criminality. And you can remind them every time they try to pardon someone connected to the criminality. What was happening in Georgia and trying to find those 11,000 extra votes was criminal in nature. It never, unfortunately, got to see the light of day in a trial sense. And I have all sorts of issues with Fani Willis and how it got to that point. But it still was a criminal matter, which is different from corruption, which is usually having to do with lapse in ethics. You can be corrupt and not necessarily also criminal. This is straight up criminal. And the Democrats don't highlight that. I think that there's a lack of focus in the DNC in the way that the Republicans are always focused. Now, they may be focused with lies and untruths, but have you ever been on social media and the bots are all saying the same thing and the Republicans are all saying the same thing, like they're getting their talking points from a central news service, Fox News, and they are.
Yeah.
But the point is they're on message and they're consistent. And I wish the Democrats could do that, not lie, just tell the truth. There's ample amounts of truth out there that you can point to remind people. And that's part of the reason I believe, sorry to digress, that's part of the reason I believe that Donald Trump was reelected, because there was not enough reminding people of how bad he was in his first term. And people say, well, you start romanticizing and you say, well, maybe he wasn't that bad, or maybe he wasn't that much of an authoritarian. You know, he's not going to actually try to do all those things in Project 2025. He was not going to be that bold. And we're here because people didn't necessarily remember or wasn't emphasized enough. And I hope that answers your question, Scott. I mean, the Democrats could do so much more. They need to do so much more. And it's not about being the majority party. It's not about what they can do legislatively. There are things they can do as far as manipulating the news cycle and also the messaging to reaffirm how criminal Donald Trump has always been. In this moment, he's pardoning these people. And it used to be where a president didn't do a pardon until the end of his term, and they were loath to pardon someone who was directly connected to the president. Now it's just whatever you want, whenever you want. Go ahead, Kim.
Just like to mention that the people he pardoned were his co-defendants in the Georgia case. So he's one of them. Yeah.
Which goes back to the criminality. I mean, I'm sorry, I got in the middle of your law and disorder, but those are the things that are just really getting at me.
Speaking of criminality, do you think it's criminal for law enforcement to lie? Maybe. Border Patrol chief reprimanded for lying claims shots were fired at immigration officers in Chicago. Once you lie, it's like crying wolf. Do you believe him anymore? Gregory Bovino called out by a judge only 2 days earlier for lying about being assaulted by a protester. He said that agents came under fire in Chicago while conducting immigration enforcement operations just 2 days after a federal judge said he lied to her about having been hit by a rock during a previous confrontation with protesters in the city. So what he said is that on social media is that his agents had been shot at and subjected to vehicular assaults, physical assaults, impeding violent mobs, vehicular blockades for a number of hours. In a written statement, the Department of Homeland Security said that Border Patrol agents were conducting immigration and enforcement operations in Chicago when an unknown man driving a black Jeep fired shots at agents and then fled the scene. Chicago police called out. They say they found no signs of anyone having been struck by gunfire where the alleged shooting took place. No reports of anyone hit by gunfire at all. According to the police, one officer was in good condition after being struck by a vehicle during the operation. A driver was ticketed, but no evidence has yet surfaced of an alleged shooting. So there you go.
Let me just say this. Welcome to being black in America. I mean, the idea that a member of law enforcement would lie on the citizenry, alleging that the law enforcement officer was either in fear of his life, protecting himself, or was attacked, or was assaulted, is not new, especially not to African Americans. And when I see that story, and I view it through the prism of the context of the world we live in right now, where there are no consequences to lies, even though we have videotape, even though we have body cams, that's why they say like a lie can travel around the world quicker than the truth can get out of bed. Whatever the saying is, we live in a world where there's no value in the truth. And when the truth does not have any value, then people are going to hew much more closely to lies. And I saw this story when it originally broke about the alleged fire that these ICE officers were under, and that was just sent everywhere. It's like, see, told you, the left is unruly and they're attacking law enforcement. They have no respect for the society. Then we find out it's a lie. But unfortunately, it's not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. And there are going to be more lies and more lies and more lies.
Yeah. Mr. Bovino, this is a quote from the judge. Mr. Bovino in the Department of Homeland Security claimed he'd been hit by a rock in the head before throwing tear gas, but video evidence disproves this. And ultimately, he admitted it was not until after he threw the tear gas. So they get caught in these lies. And here's what I wonder, Mo. When you have a guy in a position of authority who clearly has been caught in a lie, don't you fire that person? You can't have someone in a position to be respected and believed and have to be called. This is someone who's going to have to go testify in courts. And now every single time he's called to testify in court, they're going to bring up the fact that he's a shown proven liar.
Yes. And you are right. And that's the way it should be, but that's not the way it is. I mean, we could say the same thing about this whole presidential cabinet. They have been dishonest. They are not even qualified for their positions. They've lied on Capitol Hill as far as what they plan to do while in the cabinet position, from RFK Jr. To Pete Hegseth. We can run the list. We can play all the videos, but there are no consequences. What I mean by that is it's not like Pete Hegseth was fired or forced to resign. It's not like anyone in the Trump administration, with the exception of Mike Waltz, has been even moved to a different position. So the fish rots from the head, as they say. And if you know that there are no consequences for anything that you do, so long as you stay in alignment and support of Donald Trump and his presidency and the legislative agenda, you will be protected. And that's reinforced once again today by the presidential pardons, co-defendants in his attempted criminal behavior. It's seen time and time again. The truth does not have any value. And if you lie, so what? If you get caught, so what? That's about where it ends.
Thanks to our viewer Lee for sending in this next story. ICE over the weekend, a little busy in the Fremont area. That's in the South Bay, kind of the cusp of the East Bay, South Bay in the Bay Area. ICE was conducting what they call knock and talk in Fremont, which was raising concerns among some community leaders there. They showed up in Fremont early Saturday morning in the Sundale neighborhood, which is a home to a very diverse community. And apparently just went knocking on doors. The area is home to many refugees from Afghanistan that came here legally, but many have been threatened that their humanitarian parole visas could be revoked. And then they say we see ICE comes into communities and conducts raids like this. And the aftermath is that kids don't go to school, people don't seek healthcare, life as they know it just stops. So, also, many of these refugees are on SNAP, so they're doubly impacted by the shutdown as well. And here we go. The mayor of Fremont confirming that ICE did contact Fremont police ahead of their deployment. They said they were very alarmed when they first heard about it. They were informed it's a knock and talk program, voluntary. They talk to folks and try to see if they'll come talk to them. And that, says the mayor of Fremont, is all we know.
Tommy Stansel says it best in the comments, said it's stop and frisk on speed. Yes, it is. When you have people, I can't even say law enforcement officers because I can't guarantee they're actually law enforcement officers. People coming to your door under the pretense of having a conversation with you to glean whether you are in the country legally or not. There is no upside to you opening that door and having that conversation. And it may be reported as going on in Fremont. I'm quite sure it's going on elsewhere around the country, especially here in California.
Well, what happens if you just don't open the door?
Nothing. That's what I tell people to do. Don't open the door unless it's exigent circumstances. They legally, and I say this with a grain of salt, legally can't kick open your door, but they're less likely to involve themselves in a situation just because you didn't open your door. You know, you don't have to open your door. You don't have to talk to them through your door. And I would recommend neither. I just have a general rule. I don't, if you show up to my house unannounced, I'm not opening the door. No. And if it's police, I will ask, excuse me, what are you here for? And they say, yeah, there are reports of a burglar in the neighborhood. I said, thank you very much. I'll make sure that all my doors are locked. Good night.
I don't open the door either, unless if someone's rolling up unannounced, they'll text me. They'll say, hey, I'm here, whatever. If I don't know you, then I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you to sell me anything. I don't, there's no reason for anyone to be on my porch unless there's someone that I invited to be here. So no thank you.
Why would I open my door and negate the whole purpose of a lock and an alarm? Why am I going to willingly open my door to someone, at least first blush, I know is going to be hostile? It's a hostile engagement. There's no need to open the door. And some was saying ICE is smashing and breaking into cars. Yes, but that's different from you opening the door and having the conversation with them. In other words, if ICE is going to do something illegal, then don't help them. There's no upside to having a conversation with ICE. None. We know that they've detained people who were citizens and had proof. Right. So why would you voluntarily put yourself in a situation where you or a family member or a friend can be unlawfully, illegally, violently detained? If you're going to kick in my door, come on with it. Castle doctrine. I would rather go that route than open the door and have them lie and say, I invited them in or something.
I can imagine if you're a refugee from Afghanistan, you're here legally, but you look through your peephole or your side window or what have you, and you see uniformed, weapon carrying big men on your porch. It can be intimidating, and your first thing maybe would be to open the door because you're scared of them.
I'm of two minds. There are people who say like, hey, it's law enforcement. I should not be afraid of law enforcement. I'm not afraid of law enforcement, but my experiences with law enforcement, I say law enforcement, be it federal, state, local, my experiences with law enforcement is not the same as most other people. I mean, and I'm a person who I don't wear my pants sagging. I don't engage in criminal behavior. If I'm pulled over by an officer, it's yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I'm always polite. But despite that, the type of treatment I've received in response has not met that level of respect and politeness. So how I respond to law enforcement or what I recommend for my sons if they're approached by law enforcement, two different things. What I'm saying is I tell them, always be respectful, always be polite, do not argue. But also I tell them, do not engage.
Right.
You know, that's like if you're at the house and law enforcement knocks on the door, you're free to talk to them through the peephole. But under no circumstances are you to open that door. No, there's nothing that they can tell you short of there's a bomb threat and everyone needs to evacuate, or there's a fire and you need to evacuate, that you need to open that door. Short of that, there's nothing. And I encourage them not to open the door because that's the only line of protection they have to a misunderstanding.
Right.
Or some sort of verbal confrontation that then escalates. Don't open the door. So that's just where I'm coming from.
Minute they open the door, they could see something suspicious behind you, and then they're then all bets are off, right?
It's been called probable cause.
Right.
You know, and it could be marijuana on the table, but a certain amount of marijuana. You know, I mean, it could be anything. I'm saying you lose control of the situation and you lose your autonomy the moment you open the door. So be it ICE, be it fake ICE, be it local law enforcement, I always say, if you want to have a conversation, you can talk through the door. I can hear you just fine. Me, I don't even enter into the conversation. But if you want to at least find out why they're there, then I wouldn't go any further than that. Because you know ICE is only there for the express purpose of taking people away. Why would you open the door?
And that, my friends, is Law and Disorder.
Tune in again next time for more Law and Disorder on the Mark Thompson Show.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out there.
Kim, I feel it's kind of unfair, but I think we do need to have at least a little bit of news before we move on.
I think we can do that. I like it. I can make it happen. On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. This report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. The flight delays and cancellations are rising at the nation's airport. The FAA started cutting the number of flights on Friday due to shutdown-related staffing issues. As of this morning, more than 1,700 flights have already been canceled, with more than 4,500 delays. And air travel is likely to remain a bumpy ride for a while, even with the Senate so-called breakthrough on funding the government. That's because the upper chamber needs to rewrite and submit the new text of the agreement for approval. Even if the Senate is able to act quickly on the agreement, it still has to be approved by the House and signed into law by President Trump. All of this takes time, so those delays at the airport will not be over quickly. Arizona Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva will be reportedly sworn in as early as this week. Multiple reports say she'll be sworn in by House Speaker Mike Johnson before a vote is held on this government funding bill. Grijalva won a special election in September, but Johnson has not sworn her in due to the House not being in session. Well, at least that's what they say. This is the reason. What the real reason is, you know. The Epshteyn files. The Supreme Court is rejecting a challenge to same-sex marriages. The justices declining to take up the appeal from former Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis. Remember her? She was the one who refused to marry same-sex couples even when it became the law in her state. The County Clerk Kim Davis to overturn the 2015 landmark decision. Davis, as I mentioned, received national attention by refusing to issue same-sex marriage licenses to a couple due to her religious beliefs. So she went to the Supreme Court to challenge same-sex marriages, and the justice declined to take up the appeal.
Hey, Kim, can I jump in there? And
please.
The only note I would make is the Supreme Court declined to take up the challenge for this case. But I firmly believe that another one which would be more suitable for the SCOTUS to, what's the phrase I'm looking for, to at least give the pretext that it's a legitimate case to look at, to then roll back rights as it relates to gay marriage. Kim Davis and her case, it was too flimsy. But I believe that they are devising that case to run up the ladder to the Supreme Court to roll back gay rights, gay marriage. It's coming. It's just not this case.
The Supreme Court will consider whether or not mail-in ballots received after Election Day can be counted. Shouldn't they be counted if they were stamped, received by Election Day, by the timestamp? I don't know. The case involves a Republican-led lawsuit over a Mississippi state law put into place during the pandemic. The law let mail-in ballots postmarked by Election Day to be received up to 5 days later be counted. The Supreme Court expected to hear arguments next year and rule by the summer ahead of the midterm elections. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the United States carried out strikes on 2 more alleged drug boats over the weekend. Strikes took place in the Eastern Pacific yesterday and killed 6 people. In a post on X, Hegseth said the vessels were known by U.S. intelligence to be associated with illicit narcotics smuggling. More than 70 people have been killed in the more than a dozen strikes started in September thus far. 2 top BBC executives are stepping down following backlash over the editing of a speech made by President Trump on January 6th of 2021. Trump welcoming the resignations of BBC Director General Tim Davie and Chief Executive of News Deborah Turnus, calling them both very dishonest people. The BBC has also recently faced criticism for other news coverage, including a documentary on Gaza. The latest controversy happened after the Telegraph newspaper published a leaked internal memo claiming parts of Trump's speech were edited together to make it appear that he explicitly encouraged the storming of the Capitol.
Can we stop right there for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about lies and truth? He explicitly encouraged the storming of the Capitol. I am a paid contributor for the BBC, so I say that in the interest of full disclosure. Interviews, speeches are edited all the time. And this goes back to even 60 Minutes and how they edit interviews. It's usually for time and space. And I looked over the speech and there wasn't a material change to the expression of what was the sentiment of the speech.
Mm-hmm.
But now it is a time where it is looked upon that you are forwarding some sort of political agenda simply by editing something. You're editing for time and clarity. You know, like a 60 Minutes interview might be over the course of 3 hours. You're trying to boil it down to, 30 minutes that'll actually be on air. And you're trying to edit it for clarity. That is what is happening here. But since so many outlets, including ABC and including MSNBC, have capitulated and paid money and Paramount and CBS because they want these mergers and what have you, we're now at a point where people who I believe are largely ignorant of the journalism process, how it works, especially good journalism, they're assuming that the president has been harmed when it is not that at all. You are just editing for clarity and condensing it to fit within a certain amount of page length or a certain broadcast window. That's it. And now the BBC has rolled over, firing executives, and it's going to make it even worse for what's happening now in this era of journalism.
There is a blanket policy usually for journalists that you don't edit the president of the United States, at least in this country. Now, and over in England, they probably don't have that policy when it relates to, the leaders of other countries. But in America, like I remember when Barack Obama used to take the biggest pauses, he would, and it was like you weren't cutting anything out but dead air, but still you wouldn't touch it because that's what the president said. That's how he spoke. That's what you leave. That's it. So I understand editing for time, but just like as a journalistic practice, editing what the president says, there's enough wrong with what he says and does. We don't need to make it look any worse Like,
Fair enough.
you let it stand on its own merit, because what he said was bad enough. I don't know. Cleveland Guardians pitchers Luis Ortiz, and hopefully I'll say this man's name right, Emmanuel Clace, are facing charges related to a sports betting investigation, Mo. The two are accused of taking part in a scheme to intentionally throw bad pitches during games so bettors could wager. Both players were indicted, and Ortiz has been arrested. Clace not currently in custody. And it goes to what you were saying, the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yep. Wait, we still haven't hit the real iceberg yet. These are indictments coming out of investigations which were started months, years ago in some respects. There are plenty more investigations getting to the heart of the matter, which are going on right now, and those indictments are coming in the future months, the really, really bad ones.
We haven't seen them yet?
Oh, no. It's going to be a hell of a lot worse, and I believe it's going to fundamentally change our view of whether the sports that we watch, professional and college, and you didn't include the story about the college athletes, the basketball athletes who were banned this week as well because of their attempts to rig games. So it is across all levels of competitive sports, from college to pro, from basketball to baseball to football, from umpires to referees. Our concept of sports and what is legitimate is going to go through a reckoning, which I don't know whether our sports will ever be able to fully recover from.
I should have put this next story in Law and Disorder. A New Mexico man charged in a double homicide told deputies a cockroach told him to kill. The sheriff's department there says 25-year-old Alexis Hernandez was charged with 2 open counts of murder in connection with a Friday incident inside of a home in Albuquerque. The man allegedly said he received an encrypted message in a cockroach that he needed to kill. Hernandez said he had to do what he had to do. So, the cockroach killer. iHeartMedia and TikTok teaming up to launch the first of its kind multi-platform partnership. The venue includes a launch of the TikTok Podcast Network, which will feature up to 25 new podcasts hosted by TikTok creators. The partnership also includes TikTok Radio, a fast-paced format pairing TikTok creators with experienced iHeartRadio personalities, where listeners will feel like they're scrolling on TikTok, but with their ears.
I thought, in fact, I know for a fact, Sirius XM has a TikTok radio channel.
Oh, do they?
Yes, they do. I wonder just about the legalities of it, the trademark, copyright of just using TikTok radio, because I know for a fact Sirius XM probably has a copyright on that.
What's the thinking about TikTok radio?
There it
going
is.
From, like, you go from, oh, there it is, go from scroll to scroll to scroll. I mean, isn't that a little busy for the ears? No smooth transitions, just like this blast of information coming straight in your ears.
It sounds like, from the way they describe it, it's not unlike what we're doing right now, where you have these news bites and just short vignettes that you can digest and you move on. You don't spend a lot of time on it. Go from topic to topic to topic to topic in the way that we kind of scroll on our phones and we move from thing to thing to thing. We don't spend a lot of time. Most people just spend time reading the headlines and not the body of the article.
Sure, and that makes sense, but I just mean audio wise. If it's only audio and not video, and there's a difference, like at least as we're moving from topic to topic, it's a little more smooth. There's, polished transitions, or hopefully polished transition. It's more like a traditional, like I'm not trying to assault your senses. Whereas with that, I just feel like this barrage of different sound, not sound, like all kinds of stuff coming at you could be very disconcerting for the ear.
It could be, and it also could be something that's not meant for us. What I meant for us is,
old people.
Because what I want as a almost 56-year-old man, or what I enjoy or how I consume information, is probably very different from the TikTok generation and how they consume information. I do know that a lot of Gen Z people get most of their news from social media outlets, not traditional news sources. So they're not sitting down watching a full news show, they consume information very differently. And so this is probably not something that's meant for me, not meant for you, definitely not meant for Tony, but I'm quite sure there is a sizable audience out there who does consume information in such a way. Just not us.
This is a story, I need to have this item. Wizard of Oz fans will soon have the chance to own one of the most iconic costume pieces from this film. Margaret Hamilton's original Wicked Witch of the West black hat goes up for auction next month. It'll be part of the Heritage Auctions December Hollywood Signature Auction. It'll also include Judy Garland's red rehearsal slipper, and there's a bunch of those different pairs of red slippers. So here's another one coming up. The cast signed copy of the script, of the book rather, the original book. Other items that will be part of the auction include Elvis Presley's 1976 Harley Davidson, Marilyn Monroe's Cleopatra costume, and artwork from Star Wars. Oh, to own that hat. Can you imagine?
Oh, it'd be great to have, but I can't afford it.
No, I can't afford it either. No, thank you. This report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. There is the Lion's Mane coffee. If you haven't had a chance to try it, boy, is it really, really good. The tea is good as well. All coming with Lion's Mane, supposed to give you some clarity and mental alertness, but there's so much more to explore at CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. And the tasting notes will tell you exactly what it is you're about to order, from the best coffee that you'll put past your lips, as Mark likes to say, to my very favorite teas, CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. And if you find something you like, please use the super secret Mark Thompson Show code. It'll save you 10% off. It is Mark T at checkout. Mark T at checkout will get you 10% off. No spaces there. And I will say it's time for me to order some of these teas because I like to use them as stocking stuffers. So I have to go on the website and pick out some gifts. CoachellaValleyCoffee.com.
That's a great idea.
I like it.
The stocking stuffers. It's now the time to start thinking about that.
It is the time. And you know what I was reading is that apparently there's going to be all kinds of shipping delays from things coming overseas. So in this particular instance, it's coming right from California in Coachella Valley, so it'll get to you no problem. I'm Kim McAllister. This is The Mark Thompson Show.
And there you have the news. And I want to remind you, coming up at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have a little bit of Mark Thompson and his previously recorded conversation with Dr. Nicholas Wrigh at the bottom of the hour. So if you're missing Mark, and I understand that, I don't take it personally, you get a little bit of Mark at the bottom of the hour with Dr. Nicholas Wrigh. Before we get there, and I also want to say thank you to Harry Magnan for the $5 for the Mohattan at the Red Jack. Hey.
So the Red Jack is a bar in San Francisco. They have been so supportive. They put up these drinks. They have the Marktini, the Kimikaze, and another co-worker from KGO Radio when the station shut down, the Medoro Mule. And they have these drinks there, and a portion of the proceeds gets kicked right back to these shows. So that's at the Red Jack. So they say Mo needs his own Red Jack drink, the Mohattan.
You know what? I cannot disagree with that. But yes, anything named after me is very cool. But I would not want a stadium named after me.
Really?
And our president, in his never-ending quest to self-aggrandize, wants to have a stadium named after him. In fact, he was yesterday, at the Washington Commanders game. And I'm a firm proponent of stopping with this whole idea that politics shouldn't be in sports. Politics has always been in sports, and this particular president is ever present, and his politics are ever present relating to sports. And the Washington Commanders have been long fighting for a new stadium to replace RFK Stadium. To that end, President Donald Trump put it out there through his advisors and, in the whisper campaign, he would like this new stadium named after him. Hopefully that won't happen, but there's a possibility it could. Usually put it this way. Usually they name stadiums after dead people.
I thought, Mo, they named stadiums after companies that paid big bucks for it.
Well, they usually have a a name of the stadium, and then there's naming rights on top of it.
Okay.
Like for example, you had the Forum in Inglewood where the Lakers used to play. Then it turned into the Great Western Forum because they had Great Western Bank, and then they changed it again. And then they will build certain stadiums like Staples Center with a naming corporation already connected to its creation.
Right.
If there's no corporation connected to the stadium, like in LA, we have SoFi Stadium. SoFi was connected to the construction of the stadium, so they had first chance at naming rights. Sometimes they just build a stadium and then they'll put something on top of it. Arlington Stadium, where the Dallas Cowboys play, that was Jerry Jones's creation, and then they brought in AT&T on top of it, and then they said AT&T Stadium. So it depends on how the stadium is constructed, but yes, for the most part, they're just naming rights deals. Like for example, Staples Center where the Lakers played is now Crypto.com Arena.
Right.
So if they change the naming rights to it, so it could go either way. It depends on how they want to do it. It could be, I don't know, it could be FedEx Trump Stadium or something like that. Heaven forbid.
Yeah. Well, he likes to slap his name on everything. Isn't this the guy that wants himself posted on the,
yes,
the mountaintops and the, yeah, no thanks.
He would love to be on Mount Rushmore. He would love to be on the name of the ballroom. He wants to put Melania's name on the Kennedy Center. And like I said, if your name is on something, it gives the sense that either you created it, you own it. He's, as all presidents are, they're concerned with their legacy, but he, for some reason, associates having his name on it as part of his legacy. It's not likely to happen, but it possibly could happen. And I mentioned this story because
he's got all these billions from crypto, Mo, so he could pay to have his name put on there, right?
He could, but he's never supposed to use his own money.
Oh,
He's supposed to get other people to do it. He doesn't pay his own contractors. What is he gonna do? Shell out money? No. But I mentioned this because President Trump and the involvement of the president in sports, it's one thing if he's just showing up to games, but it's another thing when he's always actively commenting about the sports, what's going on in the NFL. He's complaining about the kickoffs, or he was complaining about Colin Kaepernick, or he's complaining about who is or is not coming to the White House and why. That's involving himself in sports. And when he went to the Commanders game yesterday, he decided, because we're on the eve of Veterans Day, to read the oath that all veterans take in pledging their support and defense of the Constitution. And all I can say is we have some video. It didn't go as well, I think, as the president would have liked.
That is a lot of booing, Mo.
It's not only, it's a visceral response.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at events where you have political figures who may show up, and whatever president shows up, you're going to get some booing regardless. That has always been the case. But I've never heard anything like that. The visceral response. And maybe DC is not indicative of the rest of the country, because I know the president is beloved in some quadrants. Like he would show up for a college football game down south or a NASCAR event, and you have a very different reaction. So I'm not going to say that what happened in Washington, D.C. is emblematic of the rest of the country. That would be untrue. But I will say that I don't remember any president being booed like that,
Yep.
as vociferously as that, as frequently as he travels around the country. Now, he'll show up next week at a UFC event and they'll just love him. But I've never seen that type of negativity voiced in relation to a president. And we could talk about his polling numbers, but you can't deny that he actively employs tactics which does not endear himself to the majority of Americans. And again, I'm not going to contradict myself. Part of the Republican superpower is they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of that. They don't care. It doesn't matter whether you boo him. It doesn't matter whether you protest him, like we saw with the No Kings protests. President Trump is going to do whatever he wants to do. Number one, because he knows he's not going to get any measurable or significant pushback from Democrats, and he's not going to lose any support from his Republican base. And as long as those two things stay true, there's no reason for him to change course, even though he's insecure as an individual and wants to be beloved.
Got a message from CC Ryder with a 10. Thank you for that, CC. The North Korea, Kim Tu-sung University, Kim Tu-sung Square, Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, Kim Tu-sung Stadium, she writes, a major sports venue in Pyongyang, and Kim Il-sungya National Flower. So yeah, equating to the Trump stadium idea to that dictators do this all the time, name things after themselves, right?
Absolutely. And Donald Trump wants to be remembered. He wants that statue. He wants that monument, and however shape it may take that form, where he wants to be seen in that same light. And what he leaves out and forgets is that's forced support. You know, if you see Kim Jong-un, excuse me, and you have any type of gathering, people are forced to applaud under threat of death. And he wants to be revered in that way. He wants to be seen as someone who's an authoritarian in that way. He just doesn't want the title of authoritarian. I'll give you an example, and this has to do with race and racism. I'll go on social media and I'll point out, that's racist or that's racist, and people bristle at the title, at the accusation. They're okay with the behavior. They're okay with the tactics. They're okay with whatever's being done. They just don't want the title. Donald Trump is okay with everything which is connected to being a dictator. Donald Trump is okay with all the trappings of quote unquote being a king. He just does not want to be seen in that light and affixed with that title. He doesn't want to be called a dictator, but he's just fine with pulling out the dictator's playbook. He's just fine with cozying up to Viktor Orban. He's just fine with hanging out with Kim Jong-un and sending love letters back and forth. He's fine with all of that, but he doesn't want to be called a dictator. He doesn't want to be called a king, but he's okay with everything which is emblematic and reminiscent of them.
Scott Rittenberg with a 5. Thank you, Scott. Says, Mo, is this gambling scandal the route to my Lions have never won a Super Bowl? I wonder how many of them will get a pardon. Maybe it's part of the pact.
I think the Lions are actually going to make it to the Super Bowl this year if they can get past my Rams. The Lions are very, very good. I would not use any conspiracy theory to keep the Lions out of the Super Bowl, because historically, and I say this because my mother is from Detroit, but Lions have always been my second favorite team, going back to when Wayne Fontes was coach. So, I mean, I am intimately familiar with the history of the Lions. It wasn't a well-run organization. It's much better now, and I believe they're closer to a Super Bowl than ever before. And if I weren't rooting for my Rams, I'd be rooting for the Lions. But I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. They might get there this year.
Kung Fu Femmes with a 5. Thank you, Kung Fu. Says, do you think Trump will ultimately pardon Maxwell?
Yes. What more evidence do you need? He's pardoning his co-conspirators. All of those other crimes. I mean, why would he's going to pardon it? He's going to pardon anyone who can do anything for him. and there was no reason to move Maxwell in the first place. So they've already capitulated on some level. She is going to get out of prison.
Luis with 5. Thank you, Luis. Mo, people are uneducated. They are for ACA, but against Obamacare, though they're the same. It's like, I hate avocados, but I really enjoy guacamole.
As I said earlier, I don't believe people fundamentally are informed or educated enough to understand the health cliff that we're on, the healthcare cliff that we're on the precipice of. And the fact that they can't distinguish between Obamacare and ACA is just further evidence of that. And it's going to get much worse before it gets better.
Lastly, Carrie throwing in a couple. Thanks for all you do, writes Carrie. Oh, Carrie, thank you. We appreciate that.
But all the thanks go to Kim and Tony and Albert when he's here, and Mark, obviously, when he's here. But thank you for supporting the show. It does mean a lot. In just a moment, and make sure Tony's ready, we're going to go to a conversation between Mark and Dr. Nicholas Wrigh. And I know you miss Mark. I miss Mark as well. So this is a way that we can incorporate Mark into the show. So you have just a little bit of Mark every now and then. I'm going to be with you for the rest of the week, but thank you for supporting the show as we go through this week. I know I'm very different than Mark, and I have a different delivery, and somehow, in some ways, a different outlook. I think I'm more pessimistic and critical of the Democrats than Mark would be. This was just one of those days where it hurt me to my soul when I got that news alert that 8 Democrats had defected, effectively ending the shutdown. Now, there are other hoops that have to jump through, procedural measures, but effectively this would end the shutdown, and the Democrats have come away empty-handed. That broke my heart. And that's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, it's going to be very expensive for a lot of Americans who are not going to be able to afford to take care of themselves and their families with health insurance.
Yeah. And this goes back to something I said last week, where I said, with the election of Donald Trump a second time, it's not that I wanted him to win, but I said, if he were to win, there have to be consequences. That's a word I always focus on, consequences, so people would not ever make a similar decision ever again. And this might be some of them for people to see. It's like, we voted collectively as a country against our own interests, and it has to hurt on some level, or we might do it again.
Well, you see it with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who didn't seem to get it until it personally affects her. And now that she's looking at increased healthcare costs for her own children, right? And she's looking at it going, oh, we can't do this to America because it affects me personally. So maybe it has to have a personal effect for anybody who voted for Trump, who then turns around and says, oh, what just happened to me? Right? Maybe that's the only way to get through to people. I just hate that people will die because of it.
They will. And people will suffer. And maybe the needs of the many will be served better for that. I don't want that, but maybe that's the only way that we can get to the other side of this, is to actually deal with the destruction of this country. And I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but I've reserved my remarks for moments just like these, where we can tell what's going to happen with healthcare. We can tell what's going to happen to people, everyday Americans who cannot afford this country. We can tell, and there's no happy ending there. And the only way that we can possibly make sure this doesn't happen again is to go through it, so we have a reference point that we never want to experience this again. And now we're going to go to Mark Thompson and Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, and I'll rejoin you on the other side.
The Mark Thompson Show.
This is Mark Thompson.
I'm excited to have a real, honest-to-goodness, smart guy in our midst. This is someone who is a member of the Royal College of Physicians. He's a neuroscientist who studies, researches the brain, technology, also investigates security, the University College in London, Georgetown University, Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. He also advises the Pentagon Joint Staff. He works with governments and the private sector, worked as a neurology doctor in London and Oxford, and has published numerous academic papers. It's like reading my own resume when I read his introduction. The BBC, the New York Times have all covered and integrated his research. He's appeared on CNN and the BBC, regularly contributes to outlets like Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, and Slate. His new book is Warhead: How the Brain Shapes War and War Shapes the Brain. How about it for the wonderful Nicholas Wrigh, everyone? Man, you've done a lot, Nick Wrigh. Congratulations.
It sounds a lot more impressive than it looks from the inside.
Okay,
don't worry about that.
Fair enough. Boy, you seem well positioned to help us evaluate the kind of stressors that we've all endured to some extent, or that many chunks of society and humanity have endured. Tell me about Warhead and about your research and how it works.
Yeah, so I'm, as you said, I was a neurology doctor and then spent a number of years using functional brain imaging and other research, sort of really looking at human brains. And then I've also spent now over a decade advising the Pentagon Joint Staff, and I've learned their perspective, how they think about things. And Warhead is bringing those two together and making it understandable for a general audience. And the reason why that's so important right now for the concerned citizen is that right in our time, we could lose, right? The democracies could lose. The United States could lose a war against China. And that's that's literally, I start the book in the preface, you know, I'm sitting in a pub with a friend of mine and he's like, oh, what are you working on? I was like, I'm writing a book about war in the brain. He's like, no one's going to go to war over somewhere like Ukraine or Taiwan. And even if they do, don't worry, America's going to be fine. And I'm like, that's not what they think in the Pentagon. We could lose. And we need to think about the central weapon of war, what has always been the central weapon of war, which is the human brain. And we need to think about it not just because we need to win wars and not lose wars, although that's very important, but also because, you know, we have incredible capacity for destruction, and we need to understand why humans fight so that we can try and prevent wars from happening. And if wars do happen, then we can try and prevent wars from escalating. So we need to understand why humans fight. We need that knowledge about ourselves as humans. And I believe that I'm optimistic. I think that if we can build our knowledge of humans, we can build a more peaceful world through better self-knowledge of us as humans. And that makes me optimistic.
Sure. First of all, optimism has no place on this show. I will continue under protest. But I think, of course, you're right. I shouldn't say of course. I mean, I think it's a really decent insight. But it makes sense, I guess, is what I mean, when you say if we know ourselves, we can avoid these conflicts and we can avoid war. And I want to learn more, but just to step out for a second, I would say, problem is, I think that introspection that you're suggesting we need, either culturally, societally, politically, whatever, I don't know that you see a lot of that. It feels as though, particularly in this moment, we see a lot of masculine flex, ego associated with so many decisions, even those decisions involving the military.
I think, look, we need masculine flex to some extent. I mean, that is part of what we need, because we need people who are going to go into the line of fire and stand and fight. So we need something. It doesn't have to be masculine flex, but it needs to be something that is tough and is, and that is not easy. That is not a simple thing for people to do.
But you have to choose that line of fire, right, Professor?
Exactly.
You have to, okay.
You know, this is dangerous and difficult stuff, and I have a huge amount of respect for those people who do it and who I've worked with now for over a decade. But the other thing I'd say is that people are often very negative about, you know, people in the Pentagon or people in the US military, and that is just not my experience. Yes, of course, there are some people who are more, more reflective than others. But let me give you one tangible example. The very first US flag officer I ever briefed in person in the Pentagon. It was just over 10 years ago. He was a brigadier general. We spent an hour, just me, him, and a couple of his team, and we were talking about the brain. We were talking about Iran. What motivated Iran? How could we come to a better accommodation with Iran if we needed to signal? How could we make them do what we wanted them to do and not accidentally do things we didn't want them to do, and so on. I wrote a book about AI, and he wrote a foreword for that book. Right. And now he is the most senior US military officer in Europe. He is the 4-star head of Europe Command and NATO. Right. And he is a tough but reflective and intelligent guy. And there are lots of people like that in the American military.
Wow. Thank you for that example. I mean, maybe there really is optimism in all of this. In this moment, one can be optimistic. So, one of the things that historically is the case, and I want to double back to something you said because you're talking about a war with China, et cetera. I kind of feel like a shooting war with China, a hot war with China, maybe over disputed territory. I wonder if that's what you're saying, or what I was getting from you as you were speaking about it was perhaps that a nation can find itself backing into a conflict or involved in a conflict, and before you know it, I mean, you're at war in a way that you didn't think you were. Which one of those things is?
I mean, I think so. So one of the things here is to try and get a complete enough picture of the challenges we face. You can't know everything. As Oscar Wilde said, the problem with socialism is it takes too many evenings. I'm not expecting you to read every book, think about every problem to do with war. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are a number of things we need to think about. So if you think about Taiwan now, you are absolutely right. What we could end up with is an accidental war, a bit like the run up to World War I. None of the great powers, Britain, Germany, Russia, France, none of them really wanted to go to war, certainly not the cataclysmic war that they ended up having. And yet that's what happened. And so, yes, certainly it is possible that America and China could go to war inadvertently over Taiwan. But there is also the possibility, and we must remember this too, that Xi Jinping is an extremely powerful leader. He is the most powerful leader since Mao Zedong in China. China is a very powerful country. It now produces as much as the next 4 or maybe even 9 countries in the world put together in terms of manufacturing. Amazingly sophisticated technologies now too. He could, if he wanted, press the metaphorical button and order an invasion of Taiwan. He has that capability. And if he wants to do that, it will happen. And he could want to do that. That could be his intention. Many people do want to invade other countries or invade other territories because he sees that's part of his own country. Vladimir Putin did want to invade Ukraine, right? Adolf Hitler, and I'm not saying Xi Jinping is Adolf Hitler, but I'm saying Adolf Hitler did want to invade Poland and then France and then Russia. People do want to invade other countries, and there will always be people like that. And Xi Jinping could well be like that. We cannot say that's not possible. It is possible.
And you're saying so the emerging conflict would then find its way to your shores in the United States.
I mean,
or at least a decision about whether or not you're going to be involved in a conflict like that.
I mean, America is a big place and it seems very far from everywhere else, but that's not really true. Even if you think George C. Marshall, you've probably heard of George C. Marshall, the top American military officer in World War II. And he had this thing, Why We Fight. And he was like, look, the Western Hemisphere is actually, even if you take the whole of the Western Hemisphere, the US has every bit of the Western Hemisphere. There are just many more people who live outside the Western Hemisphere than live in the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere now is about 13% of the world's population. And the geography is not what most people think. So Houston, Texas is closer geographically to me now in London than it is to Buenos Aires, right? The Western Hemisphere is very long. And also America may get no choice, right? Pearl Harbor was not America deciding to sink the aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy. It was the Imperial Japanese Navy who felt threatened by the United States. What the United States could choose to do, regardless of what the US was doing, what it could choose to do, and they attacked the United States. That's what Pearl Harbor was. Why would countries not worry about what the United States could choose to do?
Wow, fascinating, and it puts it in a context. And so, with your book, you get into the thinking of the neurology, really, the thinking, I suppose, how that manifests philosophically in the way we behave, how war takes shape in the human brain. Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what war is. War is politically motivated violence at scale between human groups. It is fundamentally human. It's part of what we are. And so the book takes you on a journey. It starts at the brain stem, right at the very bottom of the brain, and goes through many different brain areas and ends right up at the frontal pole, right at the other end, that does our most sophisticated thinking about thinking. That's the most uniquely human area of the brain. But every part of the brain that we journey through can drive us towards war. So to give you an example, the amygdala is a region quite deep down in the brain, and it's involved in fear. Now, we think of fear as something we don't necessarily want, but fear is useful. We need fear. If you don't have fear, right, so there are some very rare patients who lose the amygdala. They lose this little part of the brain that's involved in fear. And some of those patients can't feel fear, and they don't recognize fear in others. And that doesn't make them some kind of fearless criminal who can take whatever they want and get everything without, worrying about the consequences. What that makes them is a victim of crime. We need fear. Fear is useful, and yet fear can, when two groups fear each other or two people fear each other, that can drive them towards conflict. So that's just one example. There's so much about our brains that drives us towards conflict. But if we understand how that works, and we understand how we can make wiser decisions, not just cleverer decisions, but wiser decisions, then we can do better than our forebears did, and we can hopefully build a more peaceful world.
Are human beings biologically, neurologically wired to be aggressive creatures?
I think yes. It is part of us. It is not all of us. And it's very important to remember that reconciliation, for example, is every bit as human as conflict. But we must not pretend about ourselves that violence isn't and conflict is not a part of us. That's just not we don't have the luxury of living with an incomplete picture. To give you an example, the two biggest books of the last 15, 20 years on the brain and war, one was Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Don't worry, guys, the arc of history bends towards peace. I'm obviously paraphrasing. He's a very intelligent, very clever guy. But the thing is that he's not so much wrong. The arc of history probably does bend towards peace. It's a dangerously incomplete picture of the world, because wars do happen and they don't win themselves, and we need to really think about that, like Ukraine. Or Robert Sapolsky, don't worry, guys, the way we're going to crack the problem of war, and he wrote a brilliant book about the brain and violence, but the way we're going to crack it is just by being nice to each other, or nicer to each other, and realizing war is bad. Well, yes, war is bad, but that doesn't help us understand how to prevent wars and win wars if we must fight them. And that's what I try and do in the book, is walk through the brain, understand all the different major things about the brain and how the brain works, and then how that can drive us towards war, how it can help us create peace, and how it can help us win wars and not lose wars.
It's just a fascinating science that you've applied to what feels as though it's human nature. Human nature is an area of scientific discourse and investigation, one that you've been intimately involved in.
Yeah.
And is your research, the productivity that you've found, the results that you've found, the conclusions that you've reached, is that the result of anecdotal looking at the subset of humanity that you look at, the history, which you're obviously so very well steeped in? I would think it's more that than it is, the kind of laboratory experimental psych that I'm used to.
The whole of the book, the whole idea is to bring those two worlds together. That's, I think, exactly the idea of the book. There are, and that's why, for example, like the people who very kindly said, "Oh, it's a great book, buy this book," the endorsements on the book jack and whatever. It's leading scholars of war, historians of war, really leading thinkers on war, and at the other side, people who are hardcore neuroscientists, among the top 10 most cited neuroscientists in the world. Those are the two different worlds I've tried to bring together, and bring those two sources of evidence together, because often if you can bring two very different sources of evidence together, you can really create something new and different and fresh. And you see both things better than if you just stick with your normal perspectives that you always have. Human nature can be studied. We've studied it in the lab, and I've tried to apply that knowledge to how we think about human nature in the most difficult circumstances, which is war.
Let me share a couple of quick notions about your book that did make it into my press kit. Truly original and unfortunately timely. Wright combines brain science, history, and psychology to challenge our views on war and peace. Would understanding the mind help bring peace or help nations fight better? Perhaps both. Fresh, engaging, and provocative. Wow, that's from the author of The Influential Mind. A fresh neuroscientific exploration of the science of war. Warhead is for anyone who thinks conflict is explained by cold reason and analysis rather than by understanding our imperfect brains. That's from the distinguished professor at the Free University of Brussels and author of Flawed Strategy, Why Smart Leaders Make Bad Decisions. These are other very smart and students of letters, that is to say authors, who are opining on your book. Wow, it's really getting some great reception. And I congratulate you on it. I mean, it sounds like some sort of breakthrough conclusions that you're reaching. And I like the way in which you understand or seem to understand kind of the warring nature of human beings, but also the way in which that can be defused such that we understand it and then end up in a place where we're not actually at war.
Yeah, I mean, and that is our goal. As a human species, our goal is not to fight wars. Our goal, I mean, we have many goals. We can choose our goals, but it's to be constructive. It's to build new things. War will always be a part of that, partly just because we're driven towards war through fear and all sorts of things and misunderstandings and so on. But also because we're constantly so vibrant, so creative. Each new generation comes along and it feels that what it's inherited is the boring status quo. And because of that vibrancy, there will always be competition, and that competition can get out of hand. But hopefully, if we understand ourselves better, we can keep a lid on some of that competition. We can walk back from some of the most dangerous paths we might be going down. And that matters within our societies, within our everyday lives as well, in our families and so on. Like, for example, if you ask the question, what do I really want? You win the argument with your partner, but what is that really winning the war, as it were? Sometimes it's better not to win the argument. It sounds obvious, but this is something people do. They Adolf Hitler kept winning battles, but he did not win the war, thank goodness. So I hope we can make a better world, and I'm optimistic that we can if we have better self-knowledge.
I have a confession to make, which is that through much of what you've said, in certain instances, I apply it to domestic kinds of arguments one might have, or just interpersonal relations that one might have that seem fraught with all kinds of similar problems to the ones that you referred to. So it's very apt that you had mentioned it as well. Warhead is the book, How the Brain Shapes War and War Shapes the Brain, by Nicholas Wrigh. Dr. Nicholas Wrigh is, again, a leading neuroscientist, advisor to the Pentagon. It is a fascinating work, well celebrated at this point, and there will be a link to it. You can buy it and connect with it under this video. What a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us from far away. And for an Oscar Wilde quote, I'll give you a ding. That was very strong. Yeah.
Possibly apocryphal, like every other quote that one looks up now on the internet. So I apologize. It's like quote investigator.
I thought it was quite special. Quite special. Thank you. All right, Dr. Nicholas Wrigh. Thank you, my friend.
The Mark Thompson Show. The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
Very topical, very timely. Very scary conversation, actually, with Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, because all the uncertainty in the world today, I was in agreement with what could happen in Taiwan, how we're not that far away from some sort of conflagration with China. it's a scary world, and the psychology behind the men, let's be honest, the men and the decisions that they make, which may lead us to war, should keep a lot of us up at night. Kim, what was your takeaway?
Frightening, especially with everything going on with Venezuela.
Yep.
There's been a drumbeat, seems like, to war, talking about land incursions. It's a very timely, I think, interview with Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, and an interesting book for sure.
He didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't pull any punches and laid it bare. Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, that is, laid it bare for us that, if you've been paying attention to history, you know where all of these events of today can lead and have led before. We had plenty of examples, and hopefully we will not ignore history at our own peril. But there was a very, very fascinating conversation.
Tammy popping in with a couple says this Mark guy deserves a tip.
He does. He's pretty good at what he does. I tell you, that Mark Thompson guy.
He's all right. He's no Mo Kelly, but it's the way it goes.
Please. I'm always humbled that he thought enough of me to say, hey, I'm going to be out of the country. How about you host for a few days? Says Mark, of course. I don't know if I could fill your shoes, but he's given me all this love, encouragement, and support that I could ask. I want to thank Tony. For those who don't know, Tony and I worked together in various capacities for the past 14 years. And if you can see this, it's been a while. And if you can see this beautiful studio behind me, Tony put it together. Do you remember that? You did it right.
Oh yeah, it was a
beginning of COVID.
Yeah, it was all during COVID. I remember just sitting on the floor, just like quickly plugging stuff back in and out while we were live. It was great.
Best investment I ever made. Best investment ever. And you didn't know where this world was headed at that point. It was interesting when I was working at KFI at the time. Our then program director, Robin Bertolucci, called me on a Sunday morning, said, Mo, can you get on the mic? I said, well, I'm 20 miles from the studio. The reason, it was January, it was the death of Kobe Bryant. And to be able to handle breaking news in the moment, the station was ill-equipped to be able to do that. This is a couple months before the pandemic started. But I credit her vision, making sure that hosts had the ability, at least in an audio sense, to be able to get on the air at a moment's notice. And then you had the pandemic, and the rest, they say, is history. But Tony was the person who came through and set up the first iteration of the studio. I don't know if you would even recognize it.
Now, I'm sure you've probably just got so much cooler stuff now.
No, it's a standing desk. Even though I'm sitting right now, it's because your studio has to fit your particular
workflow. Yep.
Yeah, your workflow. And now it's finally there. And I say all that to say, going back to Dr. Nicholas Wrigh, this world changes so quickly. We think we know where all this is headed, but we really don't, because we were living our lives as usual on February 1st of 2019, and then the world shut down a month later. You just don't know.
A lot of love for you in the chat, Mo. I'm flashing them up on the screen, but a lot of people are so excited that you're here for the rest of this week, and I'm loving the Mo love.
Well, I appreciate that, and I accept that with great humility. I know, again, here's a sports analogy. There's nobody more popular on a football team than the backup quarterback. Because the backup quarterback, you're always mad at the quarterback, and you say, well, bring in the backup. And the backup is fine for short durations, just for one play here, 2 plays there, a game if the first string quarterback is out. So I appreciate that, and I love all of you for the positive feedback that you've been offering. But I'm still going to give it to you raw and unfiltered, uncensored for the most part. I cuss a lot, so I try to temper my profanity.
I heard you say ass today, but that's about it.
Oh, there's plenty more. I have a wide vocabulary when it comes to profanity.
We'll just wait then for the rest of the week to unfold. Tomorrow on the show, you're going to love it, Mo. We got David K. Johnston coming in tomorrow.
Love him.
He is so good, so good. So he will be here tomorrow. It is also Tech Tuesday. So Jefferson Graham will bring it in. We'll do that tomorrow as well. And more Mo Kelly, which everybody loves.
It's the Mark Thompson Show. Love you. We'll miss you. And we'll do it all again tomorrow, right at 11 a.m. See you then.
Bye-bye.